The chainsaw roared through the night air, jolting me from sleep. I stumbled to my window, disoriented and confused. Through the darkness, I could make out three shadowy figures illuminated by portable floodlights. They were attacking my family oak tree, the magnificent century-old guardian that had stood watch over 4 generations of my family. My heart stopped as I realized what was happening. Someone was cutting down my tree in the middle of the night. Not just any tree, the one my great-grandfather planted, the one I had climbed as a child, the one that held our family history in its rings. I raced downstairs and burst through my front door, barefoot and desperate. The massive trunk was already half severed, the damage irreversible. As I screamed for them to stop, the workers looked confused, showing me papers I had never signed. And there, watching from across the street with arms folded in satisfaction, stood my neighbor Karen. That was the moment I understood how far some people would go to get their way. But she had no idea what forces she had just set in motion. The oak tree had been part of our family longer than the house itself. My great-grandfather planted it in 1923, the same year he built our home on what was then the outskirts of town. 4 generations of my family had grown up under its sprawling branches. I still remember my grandmother telling stories about climbing it as a girl, and later, my father building me a wooden swing that hung from its strongest limb. That tree was more than wood and leaves. It was a living timeline of our family history. Every spring, I would sit beneath its canopy as new leaves emerged, bringing that distinct fresh scent that marked the beginning of warmer days. Every fall, I would rake its auburn leaves into massive piles that neighborhood children would jump into with squeals of delight. The massive oak had witnessed birthdays, graduations, weddings, and even my parents' funeral 10 years ago. After they passed, the tree became my anchor to them, and to this place that had always been home. Our neighborhood had changed dramatically over the past decade. The modest homes built in the 1920s and 30s were being purchased, demolished, and replaced with larger modern houses that maximized every square inch of their lots. The newcomers brought different expectations about what our street should look and feel like. Most were pleasant enough, if somewhat distant compared to the neighbors I had known all my life. Then came Karen Prescott. She moved into the newly constructed white colonial directly across from my house about a year ago. I first met her at the neighborhood association meeting, where she introduced herself as a real estate developer from the city. She spoke confidently about property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Her hair was immaculately styled, her clothes expensive but understated, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. Our first direct interaction happened 3 days after she moved in. I was outside checking my mailbox when she approached with a tight smile. "Hello there, neighbor. I wanted to talk to you about that enormous tree of yours," she said, gesturing to my oak. "Do you realize how many leaves it drops on my new driveway? I had to have my cleaner come twice last week." I explained politely that fall meant falling leaves and offered to help rake any that crossed to her property. She seemed unsatisfied with my response. "Well, have you considered removing it? It would really open up the sightlines on the street. Plus, trees that size can be hazardous, you know." That conversation was just the beginning. As weeks passed, Karen found more reasons to complain about my tree. The shade it cast on part of her meticulously landscaped lawn, the acorns that occasionally bounced off her car, the birds that nested in its branches and sometimes had the audacity to sing in the early morning. Each complaint was delivered with the same fixed smile that suggested she was being reasonable while I was being difficult. I tried to be a good neighbor. I hired a service to clean her gutters after a particularly windy week. I collected acorns more diligently, but nothing seemed to satisfy her growing fixation on what she had begun calling that problem tree. Little did I know that her complaints were just the first skirmishes in what would become a full-blown war over a living landmark that had stood peacefully for a century before Karen Prescott ever laid eyes on it. As summer transitioned to fall, Karen escalated her campaign against my oak tree. What began as casual complaints evolved into something more deliberate and concerning. One morning in October, I opened my door to find a city official standing on my porch with a clipboard. He introduced himself as being from the Municipal Code Enforcement Office, explaining they had received a formal complaint about a hazardous tree on my property that allegedly posed imminent risk to surrounding homes. I invited him to inspect the oak, confident in its health and stability. My family had always taken proper care of it with professional trimming and maintenance twice yearly. The city official walked the perimeter, looked up through the branches, and made several notes. "Looks perfectly healthy to me," he concluded. "Strong root system, no sign of disease or structural weakness. Someone was overly concerned, I guess." When I asked who had filed the complaint, he hesitated before admitting it came from the house directly across the street. 2 weeks later, another official appeared, this time from the county environmental department, claiming there had been reports of a diseased tree threatening the health of other plants in the neighborhood. Again, inspection revealed nothing wrong. This pattern continued through November. Different departments, same complaints, same results. I decided to be proactive and hired Martin Weber, a certified arborist with 30 years of experience, to conduct a comprehensive assessment. Martin spent nearly 3 hours examining every aspect of the oak. "This is one of the healthiest specimens I have seen for its age," he concluded, providing me with official documentation of his findings. Based on its ring pattern and growth, this tree could easily live another 100 years with proper care. I made copies of his report and dropped one in Karen's mailbox, hoping the professional assessment would put her concerns to rest. It did not. The next day, she cornered me as I returned from walking my dog. "I received your little tree report," she said, her voice artificially pleasant though her eyes remained cold. "Paid experts will say whatever you want them to say. That tree is a liability, and sooner or later, everyone will see that I am right." Our neighborhood had traditionally been close-knit, with regular community gatherings and cookouts. At the annual Harvest Festival in the local park, I noticed how Karen worked the crowd, speaking animatedly to small groups who would occasionally glance in my direction. Later, Mrs. Abernathy, who had lived next door to me for 20 years, pulled me aside. "That new woman is telling people your tree damaged her foundation and that you refused to help pay for repairs." I told her that was nonsense, but she is quite persuasive. The situation grew increasingly uncomfortable. At a neighborhood association meeting, Karen proposed new tree height restrictions for the community, clearly targeted at my oak. When several longtime residents opposed her motion, noting the historic and environmental value of mature trees, she accused them of prioritizing sentimentality over safety and property values. Then came the notes, yellow sticky papers attached to my front door or mailbox, always appearing when I was away from home. "Trees belong in forests, not residential areas. Property values decrease 15% with oversized trees. Is that what you want for our neighborhood? Think about your neighbors for once." None were signed, but the handwriting matched a welcome card Karen had sent when she first moved in. The final straw came when I returned home from a weekend visiting my sister to find a business card for quick-cut tree removal, tucked into my door frame with the handwritten message, "Free estimate, your neighbors will thank you." I called the company, and they confirmed someone from my street had given them my address as a potential client. The company representative sounded confused when I explained I had never requested their services. That evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, I stood in my yard looking up at the massive canopy of leaves glowing amber in the setting sun. This tree had been here long before any of us, and deserved to remain long after. I took photographs documenting its current condition and position relative to property lines, then installed a simple security camera on my porch, its lens directed toward the beloved oak. Something told me I might need evidence of its majestic health and rightful place in this world. I had no idea how prophetic that feeling would prove to be. Monday evening had been utterly ordinary. I graded papers from my history students until 9, then made a cup of chamomile tea and read for an hour before bed. Through my bedroom window, I could see the silhouette of the oak against the night sky, its familiar shape comforting as always. I fell asleep with the window slightly open, the gentle rustling of leaves in the late autumn breeze serving as nature's lullaby. The mechanical growl that woke me was so out of place that for several seconds my sleep-addled brain could not process what I was hearing. I fumbled for my phone. 2:17 a.m. The noise came again, the unmistakable sound of a chainsaw ripping through wood. My heart lurched as impossible understanding dawned. I threw off my covers and rushed to the window. The scene below was surreal, like something from a nightmare. Portable floodlights cast harsh white illumination across my front yard. 3 men in work gear moved with purpose around the base of my oak. One operated a chainsaw that was already deep into the massive trunk, while the others prepared ropes and pulleys. They were taking down my tree, in the middle of the night. I did not even stop for shoes. I raced down the stairs, nearly falling in my haste, and burst through my front door. The cold November air bit into my skin through thin pajamas as I ran across the dew-damp grass. "Stop! What are you doing? Stop right now!" My voice sounded strange in my own ears, high and desperate. The man with the chainsaw looked up, startled, and switched off his equipment. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. "Hey, take it easy," he said, raising his hands as if calming a wild animal. Perhaps that is what I resembled in that moment, barefoot, disheveled, and frantic. "This is my property. This is my tree. Who authorized this?" I demanded, moving between them and the oak. Up close, I could see they had already cut more than halfway through the trunk. Sap oozed from the wound, and fresh sawdust covered the ground like snow. The crew foreman stepped forward, pulling folded papers from his jacket pocket. "Ma'am, we have proper authorization, all signed and permitted." He handed me the documents, which I could barely focus on in the artificial light. They appeared official work orders, permits, even what looked like my signature, though I had signed nothing of the sort. "This is forgery," I said, my voice shaking. "I never authorized this. This tree is over 100 years old. You cannot do this." The workers exchanged uncertain glances. "Look, lady, we just go where we are told and do the job we are paid for," the foreman explained. "These papers say we have permission." "From who? Who hired you?" I demanded. Before he could answer, movement across the street caught my eye. A porch light had switched on, and there stood Karen in a silk bathrobe, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. Our eyes met across the distance, and something in her expression's satisfaction tinged with performative concern confirmed what I already suspected. I turned back to the workers. "Please, you have to stop. This is illegal. I never gave permission. Someone has lied to you." The foreman hesitated, looking between me and the papers. "We are already halfway through. The tree is compromised now. If we leave it like this, it could fall on your house." The terrible reality sank in. They were right. The great oak was already fatally wounded. I felt my legs weaken beneath me as the foreman spoke into his radio, consulting with someone about the situation. The other workers looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. "We have to finish for safety reasons," the foreman finally said. "You will need to take up any issues with our office tomorrow." Numbness spread through my body as they restarted the chainsaw. I stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down my face, watching as they continued their work with methodical efficiency. Neighbors began appearing on porches and lawns, drawn by the commotion and lights. Someone draped a blanket over my shoulders. Someone else was taking photos with a phone, but all I could focus on was the tree. When the final cut was made, the workers coordinated with practiced precision, guiding the massive trunk's descent with ropes. The sound it made as it hit the earth reverberated through the ground beneath my feet, a deep, final thud that seemed to echo in my very bones. 100 years of life and history ended in 20 minutes by strangers in the dark. As the crew packed up their equipment with uncomfortable haste, I noticed Karen was no longer watching from across the street. Her porch light remained on, but she had retreated inside, blinds now drawn against the neighborhood's eyes. In her absence, an older neighbor approached me, phone in hand. "I recorded everything from when I first heard the noise," she said quietly, "and I got a clear shot of her watching from her porch. This is not right, what happened here tonight." I nodded mutely, staring at the fallen giant. The workers drove away, leaving behind floodlights for safety, they claimed. In their harsh glare, I could see the freshly exposed rings of the trunk, concentric circles marking years of drought and plenty, of war and peace, of history witnessed but never spoken. My great-grandfather had planted this tree when Warren G. Harding was president. Now it lay horizontal across my yard, murdered in darkness. Morning would bring practical concerns, insurance claims, police reports, legal questions. But in that moment, standing in the unnatural midnight brightness beside the fallen guardian of my family home, all I felt was a cold, clarifying rage forming like ice crystals in my blood. Karen had no idea what she had just started. Sunrise revealed the full magnitude of the destruction. What had been a towering oak was now a massive fallen trunk stretching across most of my front yard, with branches and limbs scattered like broken appendages. The stump stood as a stark reminder, its fresh-cut surface already darkening in the morning air. I had not slept after the incident, instead sitting on my porch wrapped in blankets, keeping vigil over the remains of the family tree. Officer Rivera arrived promptly at 7:30 a.m. in response to my call. She documented the scene methodically, photographing the stump, the fallen trunk, and the forged documentation left by the tree removal company. "This is serious," she explained while writing in her notepad. "Destruction of property, trespassing, forgery, and given the value of a mature tree this size, we are potentially looking at felony charges." I had not considered the monetary value of the oak. To me, it had been priceless for sentimental reasons. Officer Rivera explained that heritage trees often carried valuations in the tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes higher. "Trees like this do not get replaced overnight," she said. "The courts recognize that." By mid-morning, representatives from Green Valley Tree Service, the company whose workers had cut down my oak, arrived at my house. The owner, Mr. Delaney, appeared genuinely distressed as he examined the work order. "These are our forms, but this is not how we operate," he insisted, pointing to the signature page. "We never do removals at night, and we always verify with the homeowner in person before beginning work." He studied the signature that purported to be mine. "This authorization was dropped off at our office 2 days ago by a woman claiming to be you. She said it was urgent that the tree be removed as soon as possible, preferably when neighbors would not be disturbed. She paid cash." When I described Karen, he nodded in recognition. "That sounds like her. She was very insistent about the timing." Mr. Delaney provided copies of all paperwork and promised full cooperation with any investigation. My company has been in business for 30 years. We have never been involved in anything like this, he said, visibly shaken. I want to make this right. Throughout the morning, neighbors gathered at the edge of my property, expressions of shock and sympathy on their faces. Mrs. Abernathy brought coffee and pastries. Mr. Chen from 2 doors down offered to help clear some of the smaller branches. Even people I barely knew stopped by to offer condolences, as if there had been a death in the family. In many ways, there had been. Notably absent was Karen. Her house remained closed up tight, blinds drawn, no sign of movement. Her car was gone from the driveway, though no one had seen her leave. Around noon, Mrs. Abernathy's son Tim approached me with his phone. "I think you need to see this," he said. Tim had installed a security camera above his garage the previous month. Its field of view included the street between our houses and a portion of my front yard. The timestamp showed 1:43 a.m., approximately 30 minutes before I had been awakened. In the grainy night vision footage, a woman who was unmistakably Karen could be seen speaking with the foreman of the tree crew, pointing repeatedly toward my oak. The video showed her handing him what appeared to be papers, then checking her watch before hurrying back across the street. Officer Rivera returned that afternoon with Detective Morgan from the Property Crimes Division. They collected statements from neighbors and made copies of Tim's video. The detective explained the process moving forward. "We will interview the tree service employees and build a case. Based on what I have seen so far, there are grounds for criminal charges against your neighbor." As the police were leaving, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dr. Eleanor Winters introduced herself as a professor of environmental science from the State University. She had heard about the incident through a former student who lived nearby. "I would like your permission to bring my graduate students to document this tree," she explained. "Trees of this age and size are increasingly rare in residential areas, and there is scientific value in studying it, even after felling." I agreed, and within hours, Dr. Winters arrived with 3 students. They took core samples from the trunk and photographed the rings. "Based on our preliminary count, this oak was 102 years old," Dr. Winters confirmed. "It was in excellent health, with at least another century of life ahead of it." She shook her head sadly. "The ecological impact of losing a tree this size is substantial, equivalent to removing about 40 saplings in terms of oxygen production and carbon sequestration." The students measured the circumference of the trunk and estimated the tree's monetary value based on established formulas. Their calculation, between $78,000 and $135,000, not including historical or sentimental value. Dr. Winters provided official documentation of their findings for my records. That evening, as I sat on my porch looking at the empty space in the sky where my oak had stood for generations, my phone rang. It was Patricia Sinclair, an attorney recommended by Mrs. Abernathy. After hearing my story, Miss Sinclair did not mince words. "What happened to you was not just a neighborly dispute. It was a criminal act with significant legal implications. I believe we have enough to pursue both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit for damages." For the first time since the chainsaw had jolted me awake, I felt a glimmer of hope. The oak could never be restored, but perhaps justice could still take root in its place. The law offices of Sinclair and Associates occupied a renovated Victorian house downtown. Inside, the space blended historic architecture with modern professionalism. Patricia Sinclair reviewed the growing file of evidence spread across her mahogany desk: police reports, arborist assessment, environmental impact statement, property surveys, and security footage. She looked up at me over reading glasses, her expression serious. Tree law is surprisingly complex and punitive, she explained. Most people do not realize that trees, especially mature, healthy trees, are considered valuable assets under the law. In many jurisdictions, including ours, the intentional destruction of a tree this size can trigger treble damages. Treble damages? I asked. Triple the assessed value, Patricia clarified. If your oak is valued at $100,000, a court could award you $300,000 in damages. That is before we consider trespassing, emotional distress, historical value, or punitive damages for malicious intent. She outlined our two-track approach, supporting the criminal case being built by the district attorney while simultaneously filing a civil lawsuit against Karen. The criminal prosecution will focus on trespassing, property destruction, and forgery. Our civil case will seek financial compensation for all damages. Patricia explained that cases involving heritage trees often received significant penalties. She referenced a case in Portland where a developer had been fined $275,000 for removing a neighbor's redwood without permission. Another in Atlanta had resulted in a judgment of over $400,000. But no amount of money will bring back your tree, she acknowledged softly. I understand that. The next 2 weeks brought a flurry of legal activity. Detective Morgan obtained a warrant to search Karen's home and financial records. They discovered receipts for cash withdrawals matching the amount paid to Green Valley Tree Service, and a practice sheet where she had apparently rehearsed forging my signature. Karen finally emerged from seclusion, accompanied by her own attorney Harrison Wells, known locally for defending wealthy clients in property disputes. They requested a private meeting with Patricia and me to resolve the situation amicably. The conference room felt tense as we took our seats across from Karen and her lawyer. This was the first time I had seen her up close since the night of the incident. She looked polished as always, but strain showed around her eyes. Attorney Wells spoke first. My client recognizes that there has been an unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the tree removal. She is prepared to offer a generous settlement to avoid prolonged litigation. He slid a document across the table. Ms. Prescott is willing to pay $25,000 to cover a replacement tree and landscaping costs. Patricia did not even touch the paper. Mr. Wells, your client orchestrated the illegal destruction of a century-old oak tree valued between $78,000 and $135,000. She trespassed on my client's property in the middle of the night, presented forged documents to a tree service, and deliberately scheduled the work when she thought no one would intervene. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated criminal act. Karen shifted uncomfortably but remained silent as her attorney attempted to minimize the situation. The tree was dropping debris on my client's property and causing ongoing maintenance issues. She perhaps exercised poor judgment in addressing the problem, but her intentions were. Her intentions were to destroy something she had no right to touch, I interrupted, unable to contain myself. That tree was planted by my great-grandfather. It was part of my family history. No amount of money can replace what was lost. Karen spoke for the first time, her voice cool. It was just a tree. I will pay for a new one, a more appropriate species that will not cause problems for the entire neighborhood. Patricia placed a restraining hand on my arm as I started to respond. My client is not interested in your offer, she stated firmly. We will proceed with full legal action, both criminal and civil. Mr. Wells, I suggest you advise your client of the serious consequences she is facing. 2 days later, the district attorney formally charged Karen with criminal trespass, destruction of property exceeding $50,000, and forgery, all felony counts. If convicted on all charges, she faced potential jail time and substantial fines. The news spread quickly through local media, with several outlets running stories about the midnight tree heist that had shocked our community. Karen's reputation crumbled as details emerged. Her real estate clients began distancing themselves. The neighborhood association removed her from the beautification committee. Her carefully curated image as a sophisticated professional gave way to a new reputation: the woman who cut down a century-old tree out of spite. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. As we left the courthouse after reviewing the charges, Patricia turned to me. "This is just the beginning of the process. Legal wheels turn slowly, but they do turn. The evidence is overwhelmingly in our favor." I nodded, looking up at the sky where the branches of my oak should have been catching the afternoon light. "I am not doing this for money," I said quietly. "I am doing this because some things, once destroyed, can never truly be replaced. She needs to understand that." Patricia squeezed my shoulder gently. "She will," she assured me. "By the time this is over, she most certainly will." News travels quickly in small communities, and the story of the midnight tree cutting spread like wildfire through local social media and neighborhood gatherings. What began as a private tragedy evolved into something larger, a symbol of conflict between old and new values, between those who saw trees as living monuments and those who viewed them as landscape accessories. The transformation of public sentiment surprised me. Neighbors I had barely spoken with stopped by regularly, offering support and sharing their own stories about the tree. Mr. Rossi, an elderly man who had moved onto our street when my parents were still alive, brought a box of faded photographs showing his children playing beneath the oak's branches during a neighborhood picnic in 1979. "This was not just your tree," he told me, his voice thick with emotion. "It belonged to all of us in a way." Local environmental groups took notice as well. The Urban Forest Protection League organized a Stand for Trees demonstration on our street, with over 50 people gathering peacefully with signs promoting tree preservation. Their president, Jamal Washington, spoke eloquently about the ecological impact of mature trees in residential areas. "A single 100-year-old oak provides the oxygen and environmental benefits of dozens of saplings," he explained to the assembled crowd. "What was lost here cannot be replaced in our lifetimes." Karen remained conspicuously absent from the neighborhood. Rumors circulated that she was staying with relatives while preparing for her legal battles. Her pristine white colonial stood empty and silent, with newspapers occasionally piling up on the driveway until someone, presumably a service she had hired, collected them. 3 weeks after the incident, Dr. Winters returned with a proposal from the university. "We would like to use this situation as an educational opportunity," she explained, showing me detailed plans. "With your permission, we want to create a case study for our environmental science and law students. Additionally, we have a seedling propagation program." She opened her tablet to show photographs of small oak saplings growing in the university greenhouse. "Years ago, we collected acorns from significant trees around the county, including yours. We have saplings that are direct descendants of your oak, with the same genetic makeup. They are about 5 years old now, still small but healthy." The revelation that part of my tree lived on brought the first tears I had shed since the night of the incident. Dr. Winters placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We would like to donate one for replanting on your property when you are ready. It would be a symbolic continuation of your family legacy." Word of the university's seedling program spread, prompting an unexpected community initiative. The neighborhood association, now under new leadership after Karen's forced resignation, proposed creating a heritage tree ordinance to protect mature trees throughout our area. They named it the Prescott Act, not after Karen, but after my family who had tended the oak for generations. Local schools reached out requesting field trips to see the fallen oak, which still lay partly across my yard while the legal proceedings continued. Evidence needed to be preserved, my attorney had explained. With proper permission forms, I allowed elementary school science classes to visit. The children touched the rings of the stump reverently, counting backward through history under their teacher's guidance. This ring formed during World War II, one teacher explained to wide-eyed students. And this one, toward the center, that was during the Great Depression. The children placed handmade cards and drawings around the stump, many featuring messages like "Thank you for the oxygen" and "Rest in peace, old tree." Media attention grew beyond local coverage. A regional news program ran a feature story titled "The True Cost of Trees," using my case to highlight the legal, environmental, and community implications of urban forest preservation. Environmental lawyers and arborists weighed in on the significant penalties for tree destruction. The reporter stood beside the massive fallen trunk during her closing statement. In an age where mature trees are increasingly rare in residential settings, the law is clear. You cannot simply remove your neighbor's natural heritage without severe consequences. Throughout this time, I struggled with mixed emotions. The outpouring of community support was touching, but it could not fill the physical absence left by the oak. Each morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window light that had once been filtered by layers of leaves. Each evening, I missed the gentle rustling sound that had accompanied me throughout my life. Dr. Winters sensed my melancholy during one of her visits. As we walked through my yard, she pointed to the exposed rings of the stump. "Trees do not really die all at once," she said. "Parts of them continue in the soil, in the seeds they have spread, in the oxygen molecules they have released. And this one lives on in memory and meaning more powerfully than most." Her words provided small comfort in the face of such a profound loss. But as I watched schoolchildren measuring the circumference of the trunk and neighbors sharing stories about the oak's place in our community's life, I began to understand. Karen had not just attacked a tree. She had attacked a living connection between past and present, between people and place. And in doing so, she had inadvertently strengthened those very connections in ways she could never have anticipated. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and spectators on the morning of Karen's criminal trial. 6 months had passed since the night my oak tree fell. Spring had come and gone without its familiar canopy of green leaves marking the season's change. The community interest had not waned. If anything, it had grown as the case moved through the legal system. Inside the courtroom, Karen sat stiffly beside her attorney, wearing a conservative navy suit. She avoided eye contact as I took my seat behind the prosecutor's table. District Attorney Ramirez had personally taken on the case, recognizing its significance both legally and symbolically. The defendant engaged in a premeditated act of vandalism and destruction, Ramirez stated in her opening argument. She meticulously planned the removal of a protected tree with exceptional monetary, ecological, and historical value. She forged documents, trespassed on private property, and deliberately scheduled these activities during the night to avoid detection. Over 3 days, evidence mounted against Karen. The tree service employees testified about the unusual circumstances of their midnight job. Forensic experts confirmed the forgery of my signature. Financial records showed cash withdrawals matching the payment amount. Security camera footage clearly showed Karen directing the workers toward my tree. When Karen finally took the stand in her own defense, her explanation stunned the courtroom. The tree was negatively impacting my quality of life and property value, she stated without apparent remorse. I had complained through proper channels multiple times with no resolution. The leaves and debris were a constant nuisance. The shade prevented me from installing the solar panels I wanted. I took matters into my own hands because no one would address my legitimate concerns. Under cross-examination, D.A. Ramirez was relentless. Did you consider purchasing the property with the tree before buying your home? I assumed it would be managed properly by the owner or could be removed, Karen replied. And when you learned that was not the case, you decided to remove it illegally rather than choose another property without a large tree across the street. Karen's composure finally cracked. It was just a tree. People cut down trees every day. I did not think it would become such a dramatic issue. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning their verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison appeared solemn as he addressed Karen before sentencing. Trees of this age and stature are irreplaceable natural resources and community assets. The law recognizes their value, even if you did not. He sentenced her to 6 months in county jail, suspended, 5 years probation, 500 hours of community service with the Urban Forest Protection League, and restitution of $175,000 to cover the tree's assessed value plus legal fees. As significant as the criminal verdict was, the civil judgment that followed 2 weeks later proved even more substantial. Patricia had built an extraordinary case, documenting not just the market value of the tree, but its historical, environmental, and emotional significance. The civil court awarded treble damages based on the highest valuation, plus additional punitive damages for the willful and malicious nature of the destruction. The total judgment, $425,000. Karen's perfect white colonial went on the market soon after. Rumors circulated that she was moving to Arizona, a place with fewer trees, as Mrs. Abernathy Riley noted. The legal victory brought a measure of justice, but could not replace what had been lost. The massive trunk had finally been removed, with sections donated to the university's forestry department and to a local woodworker who promised to create memorial benches for the neighborhood park. On a clear morning in April, exactly 1 year after the night the oak had fallen, a small crowd gathered in my front yard. Dr. Winters arrived with a special delivery, a 5-foot sapling in a large container. "This is the direct descendant of your family oak," she explained. "Its parent provided the acorns we collected years ago. Same genetics, same potential." The university had prepared the planting site scientifically, ensuring optimal conditions for the young tree's growth. As community members took turns adding shovelfuls of soil around the sapling's root ball, I felt a connection to my great-grandfather who had performed this same ritual a century earlier. Mayor Jenkins, who had attended in support of the new heritage tree ordinance inspired by my case, addressed the gathered neighbors. "Today, we plant more than a tree. We plant a statement about our values as a community. We affirm that our natural heritage matters, that our shared spaces matter, that how we treat each other matters." The sapling stood barely taller than me, its slender trunk a humble beginning compared to the mighty oak it replaced. Yet looking at its healthy leaves reaching toward the sky, I felt a sense of continuity and hope. My great-grandchildren might someday sit beneath its mature branches, telling the story of how it came to be there, a story of loss, justice, and renewal. Patricia joined me as the crowd began to disperse. "How does it feel?" she asked quietly.